That's our thing as Catholics, to be constantly feeling guilty and shameful about these things. And maybe we're supposed to. I'm not, but it is what it is. It is what it is to be a Catholic and have many things that I think most couples think are normal. And I think most couples not only find not harmful, but find beneficial to their marriage. It's our thing as Catholics to still be opposed to those things and tell people and ourselves that you're supposed to feel guilty and shameful about those things. Your eternal salvation is in jeopardy because of it, and you have to go to confession. That's our thing as Catholics, is to have guilt and shame about these areas in our life, except when we just do them in a very, within a very small box. You can do it this way, but you deviate outside of that at all, and here comes the guilt and shame. That is our thing as Catholics. And yes, it does impact couples, and I think especially women because of that. Welcome back, everyone. Craig here. So no Jonah. Jonah had to call in sick this morning, so hopefully we'll get him back next week. And for that should mean that it's a little shorter episode, I hope. So I wanted to do a reaction video to a couple of clips or podcasts that I heard in the last week. And the first is just a short clip. This is from the couple over at To Become Family. I think it's Lorenza and Monica Ortega. Sweet couple. I think we've reacted to their podcast a few times. They wrote a book. I think it's called Lovemaking. I've got it. I've read most of it. I don't think I've finished all of it. As far as those in the Catholic sphere, I think they're pretty good, but they still, I guess, stay well within the lines of what you're allowed to say. Interestingly, I saw on my Instagram feed the other day a clip where he had posted that he was speaking at the Sikh conference. So for those of you who don't know, I think it just finished. One of my kids was out there. Sounds like they had a great turnout, lots of priests, lots of young adults there and not so young adults. And he was one of the speakers there. And as I understand it from his post, he was talking about his journey towards self-mastery. And I know from having listened to his videos in the past that, like essentially all guys at one point in his life, he was struggling with solo and porn, I think. And apparently now is liberated from that, according to him, which is great. Good for him. Great. So I don't know what his talk was all about, but, essentially I think he was giving a talk to all these youngsters about that. And I think on the one hand, I think it's good. I think we obviously need to be promoting chastity and self-discipline and self-mastery. I wonder how useful and helpful what he had to say would have been to the vast majority of people. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. But they had a clip in their podcast. Isn't just about, let's say, the sex and intimacy stuff, but it's a huge, huge part of it. And so I'm going to just play it. I'm going to let you listen to a short clip from one of their recent reels.
Continue. Because God designed sex so well, and for our pleasure, and for our union, and for procreation, there's so much goodness that comes out of sex. We can disorder that because it is so good. But that doesn't mean that it is the ultimate good all the time, every day, in every circumstance.
In every room.
In every room, in every...
Continue.
Obviously still a little juvenile like the rest of us, but, first of all, I agree with all that. Like, I don't really have any issue with that, but I just think it's always interesting to have these kinds of ideas thrown around within the context and assumption that you are, a couple that's following all the rules, no contraception. You're probably using NFP at some point in time. You're not engaging in any quote unquote illicit acts. And that's just kind of, I would say, by kind of modern standards, let's say post JP2, post Theology of the Body. But, I don't think any of that is all that consistent with historical and more traditional views of sex. I mean, our good friend John Farrell I'm sure, would have all kinds of problems with what they said. And rightly so, if we're going to rely on sort of the old traditional views of things. So it's just interesting how, these are things that are very, very modern, very, very recent in the long history of the church, and how she and priests and different people in authority have kind of handled these things. So I think it's still a positive development, but it is still, I still tangle with the trads on a daily basis, and those that want to bring back the marital debt, and not even just bring back the marital debt, but they want to get rid of NFP, and they want to, basically limit people to engaging the marital act just for purposes of procreation. And, so it's just strange to me to have this kind of commentary, just, without any regard for the fact that this obviously is different from how things were historically. And also, I mean, I know from their story that they've had like all of us, have had sort of an organic relationship. I think early on, if I recall correctly, they dealt with infertility, and it was great. I mean, at the time, they were like, well, they wanted kids, but they could pretty much have sex anytime they wanted to, and developed in their opinion some bad habits. And now they've kind of swung where I think they had like 5 kids in fairly short period of time, and now they're like, we can't, and so they're on the fun NFP train like the rest of us. And I just think for what do I say? I think what they're talking about here is great in theory, but is extremely difficult for those of us that just have kind of a normal trajectory, and you're using NFP and invariably have more kids than most people, and maybe even more than you had planned. And then when you get to that point, now you're dealing with having to kind of lock things down and really apply NFP pretty rigorously. And I just think for those of us that are in that situation, let's say you're in that, you've got a bunch of kids, young kids, you're having to really be tight with the NFP. The reality is you have, what do I say? There just isn't a lot of opportunity to work on your intimate life, and you kind of are forced, like, when the sun shines, you make hay. So when the NFP window, when the chart says you go, whether you want to or not. And there isn't a lot of time and opportunity to work on the quality of that and to work through issues, because a lot of times you're just trying to get it done because you soon won't get to do it again for a while. And that, I think, for most of us, I have the benefit of age and experience, right? And so we're fortunate, but 10 years into our marriage, I would have just been like, you're nuts. Like, this crap you're talking about doesn't actually apply to me, and I don't think it ever will. And I think there's a lot of Catholic couples, especially those still in the early to middle stages of their fertility, that I think would be like, find a lot of this content from the more traditional Catholic creators to be just either inapplicable to them or just kind of nonsense. And because what they're talking about, I think you could be in, let's say, a more of a conventional situation, whether it's Catholic or non-Catholic, or maybe you're using contraception. Even in most marriages where, let's say, abstinence, like required abstinence, and NFP is not part of the picture, you still have struggles, you still have need for growth, you still have things that you need to work on as a couple, that I think all of what they said would be very fitting and still difficult. Like, it still would be difficult even under those circumstances to implement some of these things. I just think once you step back and you're like, well, we're not like most people, we are using NFP, and oh, by the way, no other acts, solo acts, things like that, other things that I think most couples do in some capacity. There's this strange tension between this idea that sex is supposed to be sacred and special, like they say, which it is, but there's a tension between that and, oh, by the way, like the marital act, full intercourse, is your only option for trying to satisfy one of the many reasons why people want sexual intimacy. right? And whether they like it or not, for a lot of Catholics, and myself included, especially when you get towards the end of an abstinence period, your primary motivator when you can come back together is releasing that built-up tension, trying to, kind of make it to the finish line, try to avoid falling into other sins. And it really, I think, I wouldn't say denigrates, but it makes it nearly impossible to have, I think, that type of appropriate, reverent attitude towards the marital act because of these other rules that most of us are trying to follow to some degree. And so I think every time I hear this stuff, every time I hear Catholic creators talk about this, the sex is this beautiful gift from God and this is, etc., I'm like, yes, but I don't know how you could really reconcile that with all the other stuff that we're told and you tell other people you must do. So anyway, that was a long commentary on a short clip, but we're going to switch over to Ellen. Ellen had a recent episode, kind of a short episode. And actually, I don't necessarily disagree with most of what she says, with a caveat being, like I just kind of got over, I think it's just comments are just kind of weird, and I think in tension for those of us Catholics that, especially if you're having to use NFP and you're having children, I just think they're like, I don't know who they're talking to. Like, I legitimately don't know who they're talking to when they say these things. So let's go ahead. Let me cue it up here and let's get
permission.
Oh, okay, we're going to go back here.
Blocking.
Hold on. I'm going to scroll back here. Here we go.
First off, this is not an episode about trying harder. If you have been told that you just need to initiate more, that you just...
Oh, and the title of her episode, I think, is How to Actually Want Sex. And her podcasts are all directed towards Catholic women. So let me start that over again.
First off, this is not an episode about trying harder. If you have been told that you just need to initiate more, that you just need to make time for it, you just need to lower your standards, you just need to try more, I'm not going to talk about any of those things because, look, the real point here is you don't want sex and you're tired of pretending that you should want sex. Wanting sex isn't about effort and it's not about obligation.
Obligation. I mean, I think there's just obvious tension between what she's saying here, which I agree with, that it shouldn't be done out of obligation. There's obvious tension between, I would say, both traditional and non-traditional approaches. Traditional being, the whole marital debt thing, but even more non-traditional within the context of NFP, because I think when you are sort of automatically restricted to less than half, maybe a third of your available cycle to engage, it's what I would say. I wouldn't go so far as to say there's an obligation, but it's certainly an expectation that once you're safe to engage, you're going to do, especially the first time of the first day or two of the non-abstinence period. And so while I agree with her, I think it is, I don't know how well this fits in the lifestyle of those of us who are also abstaining for half or so, or, give or take, of the cycle every month. In addition to the fact that life just happens and kids get sick, you're out of town for work, things happen even, and sometimes I think especially during the quote unquote non-abstinence periods, that I just think a lot of the advice she's going to have here is like, well, I don't know how you really apply this within the context of a couple that's busy with life and trying to kind of lock down and use NFP pretty strictly.
Is something that we need to actually understand. And then once we understand it, we can rebuild desire for sex in our marriages. Look, if wanting sex was a willpower issue, this wouldn't be an issue anymore. We women have incredible willpower. We can do anything. And so if it had to do with willpower, we wouldn't have this problem. The biggest lie about desire is that desire is supposed to be spontaneous. This is the biggest lie that I run into. Just the thought of, if it doesn't come naturally, something's wrong with me. It's extremely common for women to experience responsive desire. Responsive desire is desire that follows input. typically physical stimulus. So desire for sex grows out of really kind of starting to have sex. Desire for sex also follows safety, connection, and pleasure. It is super common for life stages, for stress, for motherhood, for burnout, for things like that to fluctuate our desire for sex.
Okay, that last paragraph or whatever. Yes, she's right. But you know what? I mean, for most of us, for us Catholics that remain relatively fertile for the, normal course, this isn't really just a season. I mean, it is essentially a huge part of your life from the time that you first get married, let's say in your early to mid-20s like we did, until your mid-40s, late 40s, even 50s. And, the stresses of, stress, motherhood, burnout, not being able to do it when you actually want to, when your body actually wants to, only being able to engage during the luteal phase, phase 3. I mean, yes, all of these things like motherhood, stress, all that applies to everyone, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, NFP practicing Catholics and non-NFP practicing Catholics. But these all are even more acute for those of us that are trying to do NFP, trying to follow the other rules of the church, maybe ended up, sort of snowballed as you start having kids. And then especially once you find that NFP has not been very successful or reliable, it's just a whole nother level of stress that most women face coming together, especially if you don't have a ton of confidence in your NFP method or your ability to apply it. So you probably err on the side of abstinence, which just creates tension and stress. And and how much of this stress is caused to the marriage because you are totally abstaining during the quote-unquote abstinence periods, not just from the marital act, but from everything. That if there were other ways that couples could be physically intimate, like in a real way, not just holding hands and stuff like that, that I think they like to say, oh, this is good enough. I mean, other acts and things like that. That is just a whole other layer of tension and frustration. And when you have insecurity about your ability to not get pregnant, I mean, this isn't just unusual or, let's say, short seasons that some couples face. This is the predominant, I think, situation that most Catholic couples find themselves in. And so, while I think, what she's saying is all fine and dandy, I don't know how helpful this is to those of us when you're in your fertile years, which, 20, depending how old you are and you get married, it could be a long, long time. We're still in it. We've been married for 22, 23 years. So I just think, it's the elephant in the room when they talk about these things. I'm like, well, good luck trying to make progress in these areas, building security, building pleasure, finding, ways, for responsive desire, women especially, building in additional time for building connection and intimacy ahead of time. I mean, when you got kids, it can be really, really difficult, if not impossible, to actually do those things. Mom is touched out. You're waiting till the kids go to bed. I mean, I just don't know how much this stuff actually works for people until your kids are much, much older and you have confidence in your NFP method. That's just something and of course she is the same one that, emphasizes that your marriage doesn't need sex, that, sometimes long-term abstinence is required, as apparently they're going through right now. Like, I just don't understand how she says these things without, like, constantly clearing her throat and, like, just recognizing, acknowledging the realities that most people go through. And so that's just, for whatever reason, they're able to kind of just overlook that tension. I can't. Like, that's the whole reason why we have this podcast and why I'm here, is because I can't ignore the tension anymore and need to talk about it, because I know it's real and I know a lot of couples face it. Let me, we got another section here I want to play for you guys here. Let's see.
Maybe two are going to stick out to you as like, oh, that's it. That's my desire block. And I want you to just identify which one of these is blocking your desire. So the first one is emotional disconnection. Sex feels unsafe, or it feels disconnected. Maybe there's conflict around sex or resentment around sex.
So, I mean, is there any couple that doesn't at some point in time have conflict or resentment around sex? And especially for NFP couples, like, that's the biggest criticism or biggest concern I have about NFP and in the lack of other options that couples have during the fertile periods, is tension and conflict is almost part and parcel. And I get it. Yes, you need to work on that. And I'm someone, I think I could say I've made a lot of progress on that, maybe in part of that just because of age and stuff like that. But it takes a long, long time, and the resentment, comes, I think, because of how strict the church seems to be about how you conduct yourself and what things, need to go to confession, what things are mortal sins. And it just, that in and of itself creates so much pressure on the marriage that conflict and resentment are almost unavoidable unless, and I would say even still, but unless you have like infertility or whatever, or just if you are a reasonably fertile couple and you're having children, especially when you throw NFP into the mix when you need to start spacing and avoiding them. I mean, the conflict is just part and parcel to our life as Catholics, right? And so I don't know how you avoid that. Like, there just isn't really a way to avoid that in my own sort of humble opinion. Let's continue on.
The second one is burnout and exhaustion. Your body is in survival mode and you just don't even feel like there is room to think about sex, let alone desire it.
I mean, I think any mom, whether you have 1 or 10, is going to experience this. And let's be honest, most of us that are using NFP are not having one child. We're having multiple children, and for a lot of us, a lot of kids. And that's absolutely true. The, being touched out and, the stresses of motherhood and all that is, I would say, for sure, the number one barrier that at least my wife has towards kind of letting go and enjoying and looking forward to this part of our lives. So, and again, for those of us that find NFP very difficult or unreliable or whatever, I mean, again, this is not just the short seasons that couples go through. For a lot of us, this is life, right? This is the majority of our life, especially from the time you get married until, your infertility is officially over.
The third one I want to talk about is guilt and shame. This is when we have internalized beliefs that wanting sex and enjoying sex is selfish, or it's too much, or it's somehow sinful.
Man, do Catholics feel guilty about sexual things and enjoying it and pleasure? I mean, that's kind of our thing, right? That's kind of our thing. Lust. I mean, not that these guys are traditionalists, but, there's still traditionalists out there who will say that lust and sin is inherent in the marital act, and the only reason you're sort of excused and allowed to do it at all is to procreate. And while I know that, at least I don't think the church actually holds that anymore, it's still kind of baked into the philosophy and the thinking that somehow it is sinful to do those things. But even not, even like, look at how everything if you scroll Ellen's podcast, you're going to find all kinds of things about what's illicit and illicit. How many minutes before and after, can the wife climax? I mean, not to mention, of course, the what they say about acts completely independent from the marital act. I mean, that's our thing. That's our thing as Catholics, to be constantly feeling guilty and shameful about these things. And maybe we're supposed to. I'm not, but it is what it is. It is what it is to be a Catholic and have many things that I think most couples think are normal. And I think most couples not only find not harmful, but find beneficial to their marriage. It's our thing as Catholics to still be opposed to those things and tell people and ourselves that you're supposed to feel guilty and shameful about those things. Your eternal salvation is in jeopardy because of it, and you have to go to confession. That's our thing as Catholics, is to have guilt and shame about these areas in our life, except when we just do them in a very, within a very small box. You can do it this way, but you deviate outside of that at all, and here comes the guilt and shame. That is our thing as Catholics. And yes, it does impact couples, and I think especially women because of that. And so it's just like, again, it's this strange, disconnect or strange, like you're saying these things but yet the reality is kind of staring you right there. It's in your other episodes and you just don't seem to see it or don't acknowledge it. I don't know. But anyway, let me continue on here.
The fourth one I want to talk about is overtrying. This is when sex feels like pressure, when you feel like you need to perform, you need to do it well. Sex feels like another task that you need to do well, and you need to, if you're one of those people who got like all A's in school, like you need to get an A on sex, and you're not getting an A on sex, and it feels like you're failing at sex. And the fifth desire block that I want to talk about is disconnection from your body. So if during sex you just feel numb, maybe there's just a lack of feeling, you're not really physically aware during sex, maybe there's a lot of tension in your body, and you just feel like there's no way to experience pleasure. So I think something key to think about here is that low desire for sex is your body's way of saying that something needs care.
Yeah, I think that's right. But, this stuff she got talking about how, I would say especially young couples, young women, young newly married wives can really struggle to figure out how, and I think husbands, young husbands and old husbands, but, can really struggle to know how to make it pleasurable for both of you, especially for your wife, all within the context of, oh, by the way, things need to happen a certain way and things need to finish a certain way. And there's no way that you're allowed to, let's say, play in the sandbox and test out some things outside of the marital act, right? Though no, don't go do that. That, I think, is probably the only real way that you can work on things in a kind of a low stress environment and seek, bring pleasure to each other and figure out what brings pleasure to you, because all of those things are off limits. So I'm sorry, but what you're talking about happens precisely because of the other things you tell women to do and not to do. Okay. And again, I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm just pointing out the very direct connection between what she tells couples to do, what she tells women to do and not to do, and this very phenomenon of women not really experiencing pleasure or knowing how to get pleasure out of it. So, all right, let's go.
Now, let's talk about obligation and obligation sex and why obligation absolutely kills desire. Duty-based sex trains the nervous system to resist. If sex is a checkbox that you have to check off, your body is going to close. There is a big difference between choosing to generously give yourself as a gift to your husband and forcing yourself to do something that you really don't want to do. There's like a chasm between those two things. Marital sex is meant to be, it's designed to be unitive and procreative. It is designed to be mutual. It is not designed to be endured. It is not designed to be expected. It is not designed to be required. It is almost impossible to build desire in a system where your body learns that sex means pressure. So we need to remove all obligation here.
Okay, well, I'm sure there's some church doctor, some council somewhere that just condemned her as a heretic, i.e. the marital debt or whatever, right? I mean, I'm glad, I'm glad that we've moved on. I think we've moved on from the marital debt because this is exactly what it causes. I legitimately can't imagine what it's like for women, especially women in marriages where the marital debt is applied and enforced and threatened with, potential mortal sin. But that is part of our heritage as Catholics, and for traditionalists, that's still part of the package. And again, there's just this tension between what is, I would say, very recent history and teaching of the church and these things that she's saying that I agree with, but I can't help but observe the tension between that and what the church has historically taught. Okay, let's go on. She has the 3 pillars of things to build desire.
There are 3 main pillars here that are going to build desire. The first one is safety. Sex is an incredibly vulnerable act, incredibly vulnerable. Emotional safety, physical comfort, and the freedom to say no to sex are what really build this feeling of safety. And this feeling of safety is absolutely required for you to have any desire for sex.
I agree, which is why I don't know how we can reconcile that with the marital debt and to some extent the NFP process where, because you are, as effectively restricted from doing it half the time, I think it makes it less obvious or less reasonable to say no during the short window that you have to do it. And I'm not even saying that the woman should feel pressured to do that, but I think you naturally do. And if you do care about your spouse and your husband, you're going to want to do that when you can. So the whole abstinence cycle creates a level of obligation and duty that wouldn't necessarily be there if the couple didn't have to do that, I guess is what I'm saying. So let's continue on.
The second pillar is pleasure. Sex that feels good for you is sex that you're going to desire. If sex sucks, it makes sense that you don't desire it, right? If you don't like cleaning the bathroom, are you going to desire to clean the bathroom? Probably not, right? We desire things that we actually enjoy. Eating a piece of chocolate cake. You actually desire to eat that piece of chocolate cake because it is delicious and we enjoy it, right? So we need to make sure that sex is actually enjoyable, it's actually pleasurable. We need to make sure there's no pain. And then we also need to hone in on enjoying sex and what is it that allows your body to receive sexual pleasure and receive an orgasm.
Again, I agree with all that, but I have to just remind people that, this is all easier said than done when you're in the context where, let's say you've saved yourself for marriage, as we should, but then even when you're married, there are lots of boundaries that you're not supposed to to go past. And I know for our experience, it was very difficult. There was struggles early on because, there wasn't scrimmages, there wasn't things to work on it. And so some of the problems that started to arise for us kind of got worse and worse and worse because you keep going back and trying to fix it on the fly. And that is, fortunately, I'm grateful that we found a solution. But if we hadn't, man, things could have gotten bad really fast. And I really, that's the thing, this Catholics is to the extent that there are still so many rules that married couples have to follow that I think very much contribute to this problem and impede our ability to work through these problems, that I just don't think we can overlook. And that I'm just stating reality. I'm not offering an opinion of whether it's right or wrong. I'm just stating what I think is pretty obvious conclusions that you have to reach from this. So let's continue on.
The third pillar I want to talk about is permission. This is where those of us who have a lot of that purity culture influence really need to work on. This is giving yourself permission, allowing yourself to want sex, allowing yourself to enjoy sex, and allowing yourself to prioritize sex. This is very, very difficult. And this is a huge, huge pillar that a lot of Catholic women need to work on, is giving yourself that permission, recognizing, right, that sex is good and holy. That's like step one. And then we have to give ourselves permission to enjoy sex, because that purity culture like really wrapped up all the enjoyment of sex into like this being a bad and dirty thing. So give yourself that permission. Desire grows after positive experiences.
Okay, I think that's kind of everything I wanted to say there. And again, I agree with that last statement, maybe more than any of the other ones. But, you know, like it or not, we are a purity culture faith. You know, when we talk about certain acts, certain things being disordered, unnatural, even within the context of marriage, even when done mutually and with consent and respect, are unnatural and gravely disordered, whatever term you want to use. We are a purity culture faith, and she is very much I would say a purity culture promoter, even though it is, you know, what she says is, well, as long as you do it the right way, have at it and enjoy it. Well, okay, but then the whole idea that there's a right way and a wrong way for couples to do things is in and of itself a purity culture phenomenon. And so it's just always interesting to me to get to hear people like her get up and criticize and warn against the purity culture. When you are part of the purity culture, you are contributing towards these problems that couples have. And I'm not saying these are just her ideas. I get it. She's saying these things because the church says these things, or at least she believes the church says these things, and therefore there's no negotiation about it. And I get it. I respect the fact that she is taking that position. She's doing what she can with what tools are available to her. But I'm just pointing out that we are, even under her approach, even under her model, there is a certain distinct element of purity culture that is going into this, that is, again, contributing to these problems and also impeding most couples' abilities to work past these problems that only exist because of the unique things that we believe as Catholics. The biggest thing, of course, is the no contraception and the you must use NFP thing. I mean, that's a huge thing. I mean, that alone separates us from almost everyone. But that's not even the start of it. In fact, I've said a long time, that's not even the most difficult part about it. It's all the other stuff that really constrains and puts constant pressure on couples in their marriage by layering on these moral implications for couples that a lot of Catholic couples are just deeply unhappy and deeply unintimate with each other and whatever because of this. And it just breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see that, because I don't think it has to be that way. And I don't think there's a very compelling explanation for why it's supposed to be that way, other than that's the way it's always been. And someone that we hold in high esteem from way back when said these things. And that is, and even though I see there's glimpses of hope, you know, the fact that we can talk about as Catholics that there's not an obligation, that you have permission to say no, that in and of itself is pretty remarkable given the history of our faith. And so I do suspect that if we check back, if I was still podcasting 200 years from now, we'd probably things might look different. but maybe not. It's very, very slow to adjust and change these things. And for those of us living in it right now, that doesn't help us, right? It doesn't help couples trying to do their best right now. And that's why I just think there should be an urgency to address these things and acknowledge these things sooner rather than later, because you only get one chance, you only get one marriage, you only get one life. And I think that's why there needs to be an urgency to these things that I feel just compelled to help bring awareness to and help hopefully speed up the process of maybe relooking at some of these things. So anyway, I've gone on quite a while. I promised you a shorter episode, but it looks like it hasn't really turned out that way. I'll put a link to Alan's episode in the description. Feel free to leave any comments and let me know what you think. Anyway, but those are my thoughts, and I wanted to share those with you guys. So hopefully we'll have Jonah back next week. If you guys enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. And if you're not already in our Discord community, but if you some of the stuff that I talk about here resonates with you, we have a really very active Discord community where, unlike most other platforms and forums out there, you're not going to be judged, you're not going to be blocked, you're not going to have your comments taken down. Now, you may get some pushback, but you can say the things that I think most of us want and need to say and still be treated with respect. And so if you need a place to kind of air out some grievances or talk through some things or work through some things, I think our Discord community is a great place for that. So if you're interested in that, just send us an email. The contact's in the description, but it's unchartedcatholicman@gmail.com. I try to check that pretty regularly, but if it's a few days and you haven't heard from me, just send me another message. I'll get you into the group. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you're all doing well. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.